Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is Victoria with The Lonely Entrepreneur. Happy to see everybody here. We're going to give it another minute, maybe for folks to jump on, and then we will get started. I don't know if you had a chance to see, but let me see, a couple of folks are still connecting. Hang on. Sika, hi. That's a new name. How you doing? Oops, you may be on mute. Just wanted to say hello and see where you're from. Okay, we'll come back. I don't know if you guys had a chance to see today's topic. It's all around time management. And I think as entrepreneurs, that is so at the center of, kind of everything that we do. And a lot of times, proper time management. And I'll throw in prioritizing our time in there. A lot of times we'll, define our success, so to speak, and how much progress we'll make. So we'll make today's focus around that. Hi, Michael.
Hello.
How are you?
Doing good. How are you?
Good. Welcome. So, for somebody who has been juggling, a lot of things and running a 500 person company, right? Is there anything magic about time management that you've learned over the years? Being a leader, an entrepreneur, business owner.
Yeah, I wouldn't say welcome everybody and nice to see everybody. I don't think that it's magic, but like a lot of things with entrepreneurism, there's a series of tools and techniques that you put in place that make a difference when it comes to your time management, right? So, a lot of things we're going to talk about today is just the things that I learned, and there's a lot of writing about this, but it does go hand in hand with some of the things we'll talk about. It does go hand in hand with what you do spend your time on, right? Because as I like to say, everybody has more to do than they have time. So why is it that, take an example of a working mom who has a professional career or who has 2 kids and one mom manages all that and one struggles with it, right? Something that's legitimately hard. So I think in the context of an entrepreneurial venture, it's not that there's magic, but there absolutely is a series of tools and techniques and disciplines that we can put in place that gives us the opportunity to actually be working on the things that are the most important for advancing our business. And that's a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about here.
Great. For everybody on the call, I just want to make sure that, don't be shy, jump in. I know it's one issue that everybody, there's always, right? We always feel like we have more work than there are hours in the day for. And so trying to balance obviously family and work and all of our kind of normal day-to-day activities becomes a skill just like anything else that we have to do as entrepreneurs. So please feel free to jump in, ask questions. It's okay if we go a little bit off topic. It's a pretty small group, so we'd love to get into your specific questions. Okay, all yours.
Thank you. So I always like to kind of dispel some myths, if you will. And people always say things like, well, you should work smarter, not harder, and you're like, okay, great. But what does that mean? Right. Like, it's like, okay, great. So I'll just go do that. Right. So I think that like, the way we think about entrepreneurism is it's a series of lots of different skills, right? Some of those skills are around, we've been talking about fundraising the last couple of weeks. Some of those skills are around product and hiring and going to market, and some of those skills around your own time management, right? So what I hope to do today is to provide some ideas and insights that will help you do what most people have to do, which is to manage things when you have more to do than you have time, right? We always say that the great next entrepreneurial venture will be the 25-hour day. Whoever can invent that.
Feels like
We'll have some,
26 should be the number then.
but yeah, exactly. We would, even if there was a 25-hour day, right, there still would be more to do than they have time that you couldn't
Right.
fit into 25-hour day. So I think the
Right.
point is that it is a couple of different things work together. First and foremost is, Victoria, you alluded to it, is prioritization. It is absolutely essential that you are spending time on the things that are most important for advancing your businesses. And a lot of times we don't take the time to understand what those are. And
I was just going to say, because I think part of the problem is that as entrepreneurs, when everything seems urgent and everything in our business seems really important, right? I know we often deal with this when people come to us and say help, right? It's like, how do you understand what the focus should be?
right. And so choosing what you spend your time on is probably the most important decision you're going to make. And so you say to yourself, okay, great. So what does that mean? What does it mean to prioritize? What I would say is the following. You can't just say there's 23 things to do in my company, I'm going to treat them all differently. Like, that just doesn't work. You'll fail at all of them. And so I think one of the ways that we like to think about this is take the 10 things that you think are the most important things. Those 10 things should not necessarily be the tactical things you have to do. Those 10 things should be the goals that you're trying to achieve, right? So for example, raise money. Like, don't worry about the how yet. List out your 10 things. Okay, one of them is raise money. One of them is launch our product. One of them is launch our website. One of them is, right? So you lay out these big things. And the reason I'm saying 10 is that we're going to throw this up on a board. And then we're going to figure out what are the 3 that are the most important, right? So, and the reality is that you can't do 10. You can't make a priority of 10, right? Because then you just don't do any of them well. You have to say, right, okay, we're going to raise money and we're going to do it in 120 days. Okay, great. That's a priority. Okay. And I'm going to talk about what it means to be a priority in a second. Right. And so you go from the 10 and you want to end up with 3. There's nothing magic about 3, but 3 big picture things, or 3 things that it's a number that is somewhat manageable. Okay. So the first thing that you have to do is really try to set these priorities. Okay. Now, what does it mean to set a priority, right? What setting a priority means is that you're going to put a process and structure around it, and it's going to get your best attention. Okay. And remember, this could be whether it's just you, like it is for most people, or it could be when it's 20 people, right? You're going to say, okay, we're going to raise money. Cool. A lot of things that have to happen to make that happen. So what am I going to do? Number one, I'm going to set a goal, right? I'm going to raise $1 million in 120 days. That's my goal. Okay. So now I have a North Star for that priority. Number 2, I'm going to create a process. Let's say it's a weekly check-in meeting that allows me to manage to that goal. Okay. 3, I'm going to create some measures that see how I'm doing. Right. I'm going to see, okay, well, we added, we're talking to 10 new investors this week. We want to monitor a pipeline, if you will. Right. And then in that weekly meeting, I'm going to bring together my best people. I've got an advisor that's helping. I've got, somebody that helped me that was going to connect. And so when we come into that meeting together, once a week, we're going to get together and we're going to go through, here's our goal, here's where we are, right? Here's the metrics we're measuring, the number of investors we're talking to. And here's all the other stuff we have to do. We have to build an investor deck. We have to build a financial plan, blah, 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 right? So let's compare, remember the topic of this is time management. Let's compare that organized, structured, repetitive, consistent with, right, just trying to manage amongst your day going to raise money. Those are 2 different ways that you can manage your time. One is organized and structured and consistent, and you come back every week and it builds momentum and it builds consistency and you're talking about the same things. And the other way is somewhat haphazard. How many times have you as entrepreneurs talked to some people you're working with and you say, okay, let's do this. And you don't really have a way to manage it and measure it or to bring consistency to it. And like 2 weeks later, you feel like you're having the same exact conversation that you had 2 weeks before and nothing seems to happen. You're like, but wait a minute, we just talked about it. But if that's done in the context of kind of a chaotic day, right, which your days will be if you don't create these priorities and these structures around it. Okay, so the first thing is setting some priorities. And the second thing, and it relates to time management, is really to create goals, create process through which you measure, right, and manage rather, and some metrics that tell you how you're doing. That makes you as efficient as you can be when it comes to allocating your time to the things that matter, because you've decided they're the things that matter.
Michael, would it help for people, right, and especially if this isn't kind of a core skill yet, right, to think about all the, quote unquote departments, if you will, in the business and try to prioritize it that way? Because again, I think it seems like everything is urgent, right? So whether it's, okay, operations, financial, people, right? I need to hire somebody. That's a priority. You know what I mean?
It's interesting, B. I think that approach is a little bit more reserved when you're a little further along, right? Because when you're saying, right, I'm going to raise money, that doesn't fit nicely into one department. Whereas if you were further along,
right,
you'd go to your CFO and say, CFO, you own this, right? You own the process, make it happen. Something like your go-to-market strategy, like who am I going to sell to? What's my product? Where's my playground? Nobody else is playing. Like that doesn't just fit into marketing, right? So I think when you're first starting, the priorities that you put out there are, or even if you had a team, they would be cross-functional, right? And so you're really trying to decide on what is the most important stuff. And then once you're setting those priorities, when you're further along, and I'll touch on this a little bit, you are creating the process and structure around all the departments that you're talking about. And I'll talk about that in the context when you don't actually have departments, but you still have those functions. So you don't have people, but you still have those things you need to do.
Right. So, right.
Just so as everyone knows, there's 500 learning modules in the learning community. There's a whole section in there about what we call managing yourself, and a lot of these things are in there. And there's also a whole section in there called running your business. And in running your business, there's all this stuff around process and structure, a lot of things that I'm talking about, priority setting. And as we like to say, process is not a dirty word. That can be helpful to you. So, when you think about these regular processes through which you manage, I'm talking about them in the context of setting priorities, but you should also be building process for yourself around the things that you haven't made the top priority, but you still need to get done. Right. So many of you in the beginning of this might be saying, yeah, that's great, Michael. You pick the 3 priorities. Like, great, but what about the rest of the stuff? The difference is that you're not ignoring the rest of the stuff. You're just making them less of a priority. What does that mean? That means that the goals you set for those, the processes you use for those are just a little bit more lax or slower, right? Okay, we're going to do this in 6 months instead of 3. We'll check in every 2 weeks to make sure we're working on it, right? Like, it still uses the same fundamentals, the other things you need to do. And it still uses those guardrails and those structures of the process I'm suggesting. It's just not as much of a focus, right? And it doesn't get nearly as much attention, but you still need to move it along. Okay. You just move it along with less of a sense of urgency and focus. Okay. So you might have 10 things you have to do, but those 10 things are not getting the same attention, because if you don't deliver on the big ones, if you don't deliver on raising money, launch your product, this other stuff that you can do, you certainly can work on it, but does it really advance your business? Okay. Something I want to make sure that we're always policing in ourselves, because there's a natural inclination to go away from the priorities that are the hardest. And let me tell you what I mean by that. One of the easiest things to do is to work on your product or service, right? I'm going to go work on making it better, right? And that's easy because it doesn't require anybody but you, right? I can just go make my thing better. I'll take my energy and put it there. And sometimes we tend to gravitate to those priorities versus the priorities that need to convince somebody else to do something, like an investor to invest or somebody to buy our product, right? So we have this natural inclination of saying, okay, well, if I'm struggling, or maybe it's not going as well as I want it to go when it comes to investors, right? I'll just spend more time I'll make it better. And we have to understand that about ourselves, that it's actually pretty easy. You feel fulfilled, you get to spend more time, you advance it, but it doesn't really make a difference because these things that require somebody else to buy into it, namely an investor or somebody you're selling to, those are the things that really stir the drink. So just understand that about yourself. Making a mousetrap the best mousetrap in the world that nobody knows about doesn't really do you a heck of a lot of good. So resist the temptation to do that when you're setting priorities and taking the time that you're taking.
Okay. So hard though.
It is, because we want our energy to go, right? We want to feel
right.
like when you've been told 10 times in a row by investors, no, you're like, I'll just make it better.
Right.
And it's very rare that it is the rub. So again, as entrepreneurs, the structure and process that I'm talking about are the types of things used in big companies all the time, right? Your companies have all the stuff they need to do. Now, yes, they have processes and things and that are already placed in guardrails that not everybody has, but these are the types of things that make it more efficient, that make it don't feel like it's just, right, a million things going on. You got to set priorities and you got to put in place these processes and these metrics to manage to them, either really intently with your best talent and your best people and very frequently, like the things that are top priorities, or a little less frequently and with a little less attention, but still using your time and allocating it into those processes that you're using. Okay. And then there's some things that you want to make sure that you chip away at that can get lost. And in that case, I'd still build process for yourself. What I mean by that is, let's say you wanted to call on 10 new customers every week. You should put an hour in your calendar, right? And block it out and do it every week. Right? Because how many times you're like, in the middle of the day, I want to do it. Like, no, take an hour, make it the same hour every week, go in there and spend that time doing it, right? So your time management becomes function of these, putting in place these structures and using the disciplines to stick to them. Right. And what I'm talking to you is not groundbreaking, right? These are just the things that people use to manage when they have more to do than they have time. Okay.
Right. And this is the process that we're always referring to, right? No matter what it is, how small or big, if you have a process around it, then you're ensuring that things will actually get done and you put focus on it.
Right. So I'll give you an example of something that happens in a lot of companies. It certainly happened in my old company, is pricing, right? We were selling our product to, health plans and big companies, and pricing questions would come in. And you're having this debate about, what you should price. And a lot of times in an early stage company, you're not exactly sure what you should price it at and blah, blah, blah. And you're in competitive bidding situations. And what used to happen is you'd have all these like ongoing email chains about pricing, right? From all these different random people. And then you'd say, okay, let's have a meeting about this, and you get together and you do it. But then there just wasn't consistency. And so we created a pricing meeting. We created a meeting where once a week, everything we had to do about pricing was discussed in those meetings. Any one of our sales team members that had a pricing issue that was to be discussed, they were supposed to bring all the information to that meeting, provided ahead of time. And in that meeting, we had our CFO and whatever. So you can see how the random hodgepodge of emails and texts around pricing gets, hey, let's talk about that on Tuesday in our pricing meeting. Right. And don't get me wrong, every once in a while, you absolutely must have pricing in 5 minutes, but that's not usually the way it works, right? It's normally, if you have these regular structures in place, you're taking care of it. But you can see how the haphazard kind of reactionary approach to running your business as an entrepreneur makes you feel like your hair is on fire all the time. And in the context of having to move things and accomplish things and convince markets that your product is needed and all the fun stuff that comes with entrepreneurism, as opposed to when you're within a structure like we're talking about, creating the discipline to enable you to make the most of your precious time. Okay. As we like to say at Lonely Entrepreneur, and this is in the learning community, it's in the book, process is not a dirty word. It is something that enables an organization with scarce resources, sometimes just you, the ability to move things and to move them when you don't have all the things that you need, which we never do. Okay. A couple other things when it comes to time management. Everybody could come to work with 100 things to do that day. Okay. It's often the way that it feels, right? But what you really should be doing today in every day is saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to get done these 5 things, right? And I'll leave a little space for 6 and 7 because there's always a 6 and 7 that comes. But I'm not really going to spend much time on anything other than these 5 things, right? There's an analogy I like to quote all the time from the movie Apollo 13, with Tom Hanks and Kevin Bacon. We're in a spaceship and in Apollo 13 and the spaceship is damaged and it's coming back to Earth and they don't know if it's going to be okay. And Kevin Bacon says, who's one of the co-pilots, says, well, what if this goes wrong and this goes wrong and this goes wrong and this goes wrong? We'll never survive. And Tom Hanks says, listen, we have 113 things we need to do in a row that need to go right, right? We're on number 7. Let's work the problem, right? And so the point is that you come in every day with 113. Now, if you put in place process and you put in place structure and prioritization, like we talked before, you shouldn't feel like you have 113, but often we do, even within those structures, right? The point is that just like Tom Hanks was saying, it doesn't matter what number 92 is. We focus on what number 92 is. We're certainly not going to do number 7, right? So what you should be doing every day, and people do this with different level of discipline. Some people the night before, they say, these are the 5 things I'm going to do tomorrow. Right. And some people are more loose about it. But the point is that you should not let yourself get distracted by the other 95 out of your 100. Right. You should stick to your 5. And like I said, there'll be 1 or 2 things that'll come up that require your immediate attention. But, and it's a big but, you need to have the discipline to stick to your 5. Okay. If you don't, right, you don't do the 5 well, you certainly don't do the 95 well. And then you wake up after a 18-hour day and you're like, I don't really feel like I got done what I needed to get done. And that, right, that can have a debilitating effect over time. Okay, so pick the things you're going to do that day and stick to them, give you a little bit of extra space for the things that normally come up every day, but don't deviate too far. And then you start to feel like you're chipping away at the things that actually matter.
No, that's great. And for everybody on the call, I would love to hear if anybody has, this tendency to, you come in the morning and you're focused, you're like, okay, I'm going to do these things, so this is the priority. And then as emails start to come in, you find yourself doing 100 other things except the ones that you started out doing that you said you were going to do. Anybody else here?
So there actually is like a cycle. There's like a term for people who have that happen to them all the time. I think it's called executive dysfunction. So where you set out to do certain things, but you get overwhelmed by all the things that come in and then you look at the end of the day and you haven't gotten anything done that you intended to do. So yes, that's happened. That happens to me a lot of the time. And what happened to me more if I didn't have lists to keep me on track.
Yeah, lists definitely help. You just got to stick to them, right? You can't let your attention wander to 100 other things. So very, very true.
Yeah. Listen, I think that like most other things about entrepreneurs, and it's all how you do it, right? Some people manage their time well, some people don't manage their time that well, and I think it's really a function of how well you do that is how well you advance the ball on the most important things that you're working on, right? And that's really the rub for this time management stuff.
Yeah. And
okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously the discipline that goes with it. And listen, it's always easier to say, well, you just don't get it as an entrepreneur, you have to do everything. And that's just not right, right? It's a matter of how we take the time that we have, how we allocate it to priorities, and how we create process and structure to ultimately make ourselves be most efficient as we need to be. I mean, think about it. If we're the only resource, we really need to be efficient, right? About how we have to ultimately spend our time. Okay. Okay. So a couple of other things that I'd like everybody to think about. I started to go down the path a little bit of, when you have, 100 things to do, how you ultimately manage your day, right? About sticking to the things that you've decided that you're going to do. And, you get caught in getting distracted from different things. Another thing that I think is really, really important is to pick the thing that's the hardest and do it first thing in the morning, right? Every one of us have, tactical things that we do and functional things that we do, but there's usually the big proposal we have to get out the door, or, really good review of a draft website we're working on that really requires us to unlock the gray matter we have. That is increasingly hard to do as you get closer to the end of the day. So the best time to do that is first thing in the morning, right? When you're freshest. And that's when you can, hopefully have the biggest impact. That's also, when you get that stuff first thing in the morning, it also kind of sets the foundation for your day being the most productive, because you're not, you don't have this thing hanging over your head. That is, end of the day, I'm going to write the big strategic plan, right? Now, does that mean one day you might have to get a little earlier because you have stuff going on? You might have to change your schedule, sure. But I'm just saying, as a general matter, try to chip away at the toughest things first thing in the morning. Those will get increasingly harder as the day goes on. Okay.
Very, very true.
The other thing is, kind of distractions, right? So what are distractions? The biggest distractions are our email and our phone, right? When you're doing something, when you're focused on something, you should turn off your email, turn off your notifications, and put your phone on the other side of the room, right? This whole idea that you're going to go into something with a level of focus and you're going to, hear emails going off in the background and hop back and forth. I mean, that's just not the discipline of getting things done effectively, right? Now, what's hard about that, especially when you feel like you're a little bit by yourself in building your business, is that you want feedback from the outside world. Like you want people to say, yeah, I'm interested, or yeah, that's cool, or right, whatever it is. But that's not the point, right? The point is that you've got a finite amount of time to get your stuff done, and you have a lot to do, right? So the discipline of, turn off your email, put your phone on the other side of the room, and don't allow yourself to get distracted by the things you're focused on. You'll have times of the day that you can do all that, right? But what I would suggest to you is that's not something that you should just be putting next to you, right? Or allowing to interrupt, right? The things that you're doing, kind of on an ongoing basis. Okay, so pick the 5 things you're going to do that day. Do the hardest things first thing in the morning, and turn off your stuff. Right, and each of those things should help you chip away more effectively at the things that you're deciding to do. Of course, the thing you're trying to do all is based on what we said before, which is about how you set priorities. Okay. The other thing that when you think about time management is, how do you put in place not only just the process to do things, but tools that help you do these things the most effectively, right? Now, everybody uses different levels of tools, right? Some people use, task management things where they keep, track of tasks they need to chip away. Other people, there's a feature in Outlook where you can pin an email. So I know one of the things that I do at times is an email will come in. It's something I know I need to do. I'll pin it, you click on it, you pin it, it puts it at the top of your list and you can keep. So there's all kinds of like kind of off the cuff, kind of day-to-day types of things. And then there's, things like project management tools, right? Where you're taking, when it comes to doing things, you're saying, okay, what are the things I need to get done? This is where, when you do set priorities, a lot of times you're building a project next to it, right? You're not just saying, okay, hey, let's meet every week. We're meeting every week and we've built a project plan where this person's going to do this and this person's going to do this and this person's going to do that. And you use common tools like these common, project plans out there that are pretty easy and pretty inexpensive to use. We use one called Asana. And even if you don't build really comprehensive projects, you just build little things. You remember, one of the hardest things about entrepreneurship and time management is consistency. Like a lot of times you're like, okay, I had this conversation, we want to do these things, and a week later it's gone because it hasn't been kind of memorialized or put into some structure that you want to come back to it. And the more you can come back to it, right, the more that you can create efficiency around the same conversation, the same way, potentially with the same people. So you can really kind of see where you are and advance the ball, right? You always want to be feeling like you're building on what happened yesterday. And a lot of times when you don't have a lot of this process and structure and tools in place, you feel like you're starting over every time, right? Like, hey, we decided we're going to do all this stuff. And when I say we, it's you, it's your interns, it's your advisors, it's whatever scarce resources that you have. How do you make it so you're building on week to week towards what you're trying to achieve in that particular area? Okay. These are all things that should make you more efficient, right? And give you the ability to make the most use out of your time. The other thing that I would say, which isn't so much time management, but really more about managing how your own kind of energy and your own productivity fits within your time, is your ability to kind of sleep and your ability to, as we like to say, have a release, right? Because as we all know, entrepreneurship is incredibly rewarding when you get there, but along the way, there's a lot of hard work, right? So you need to have the ability to make sure that you're well rested. The story that we like to tell all the time is in 2008, when my company was collapsing, I was working 20 hours a day to try to save this thing. We had 500 employees, and you guys have all heard the story. And somebody said to me, "Man, you look like shit. You need to sleep more." And I said, what I think a typical entrepreneur would say, right? Like, who has time to sleep? And what I realized was that I didn't realize, actually, I was sitting on my couch in my office one day and I opened up the Wall Street Journal to look at something, and I kind of half like laid down on the couch or slumped down on the couch, and I fell asleep at like 4:30 in the afternoon for like a half hour. And I felt so much better. And I was like, I'm doing that every day. And what you realize is that when you don't get adequate sleep, you're just not nearly as sharp and productive, right? And so I started doing that once every single day for a half hour. And I started getting 8 hours of sleep one day a week. And so I picked Wednesday. I would get up pretty early, so I'd go to bed at like 10 at night, get up at 6 or whatever it was. And what I found was I was significantly more productive. So again, when you think about your time and how productive you are with your time, those are things that actually make it better when somewhat, it's somewhat counterintuitive. It may seem like it's worse, right? And the other thing is about having a release, right? There's, we not only work hard as entrepreneurs, but we're putting our heart and soul into this, right? So there is a lot of energy and feeling that goes into the stuff. And because of that, right? You do need a release. Now, everybody's release is different. For some people, it's working out. For some people, it's yoga, right? For some people, it's, watching mindless things on TV. It's reading. There's no wrong answers. But your brain needs to rest, right? And it needs to be able to have some space to breathe when you have all these things going on. So everybody needs to find their own release. For me, it's always been kind of working out and some yoga and some stuff like that. It's always been physical. It's been my best releases, but everybody has their own stuff that really, takes the edge off and helps them kind of manage through the challenges of being an entrepreneur. Another thing that I think is really important when it comes to this area is when you do decide not to be working, you go to the movies, you're with your family, you go to a dinner party, whatever it may be, really be disciplined about, quote unquote, being there, right? If you're going to think about work, just go back to work. Like, don't go to the movies. But when you're there, right, be there. Because in the same way that you sleep and the same way that you get a release, when you're doing something outside of your work and you're really present there and you take it in for what it's worth and you're not thinking about work, that also gives yourself a little bit of a release and gives you the ability to be the most productive when you do decide how you're gonna spend your day. Okay, these are not magical epiphanies. They're just things that you learn over time that are somewhat counterintuitive. I know there were times where you'd be out with a group of people and they'd be talking about, silliness and nonsense, and you had all this stuff going on in your business, and you're like, how can you people be, well, most of the world isn't like us, right? They have lives and kids and families, and they don't, eat, sleep, and drink what they're doing. But we should realize that when we're there, be there, take it in, enjoy it for what it is, and give yourself the opportunity to take your energy, if you will, away from, the ups and downs of the entrepreneurial journey. Okay. Let me stop there for a question for a second and see if there's any questions or comments, if there's any specific challenges that people have about managing the time throughout their day or the priorities. Happy to answer.
I know the couple of questions I had, we answered along the way. So if anybody has any comments or questions or anything, feel free to jump in. I think we're good.
Cool. Okay. Just to, got a couple more minutes left. I think that let's talk a little bit about your teams and your resources, right? Some of the context of this is it's just you. And I would definitely encourage you that when it comes to things you want to do every week, do put time in your calendar every week to do them. So you create the discipline for yourself. But let's say you've got a group of resources. You might have an advisor, you might have a part-time intern, you might have, 2 full-time employees, whatever it is. How do you make it so that time is managed most effectively, right, across a lot of the different things that we're talking about here? Well, I think probably the most important thing is that, when you set these priorities and you have these processes that are regular and consistent, where every week, right, you're going to kind of show up and talk about, what are the things that we're trying to accomplish as a group. That consistency and alignment and clarity really makes it so that people can accomplish things. So let's say, for example, we're going to raise money in 120 days, we're going to raise $1 million, and you've got an outside advisor that's helping you, you've got an intern that's helping you, and you've got a full-time employee that's on your team. Okay, we know what the goal is, right? Every Monday at 4:00, we're going to spend an hour, we're going to go through this, and we're going to look at, okay, we know what the goal is. How are we doing, right? Whoever's responsible for reaching out to investors, how's that going? Well, we've reached out to 10. We should be reaching out to 12. Great. What about the investor deck? Who's responsible for that, right? Okay, well, the advisor's doing that and he's doing X and Y. So So what these processes and structures allow two things is it now allows your scarce resources to make sure they're aligned to the most important things that you've decided for your team, right? So we're going to raise money. We're going to show up at this meeting every week. We're going to be prepared. I'm going to chip away at it, right? Because that's where you feel like we talked about before, making momentum every week, getting better every week and closer, I should say, than better. But then it also gives you the mechanisms, right, for you as the leader, making your teams the most efficient, right? So if things are coming at you in a lot of different ways all the time, right, about, in this particular case, raising money, you can answer here and there, and you can do this here and there, but it's not particularly efficient, right? It seems somewhat haphazard. When you go into that meeting every week and you've created the type of culture where people are going to show up and be organized and disciplined and structured and have meaningful discussions where you go, okay, you're going to do this, I'm going to do this, we're going to do this, and we're going to show up next week and we're going to manage it again. It's those structures that give the most clarity to your teams, the most alignment to your teams, right? And at the same time, keeping your time efficient, right? For the types of things that you need to focus on as the leader of the company. Anytime you work with a vendor, you work with an advisor, you work with an employee, creating these processes where you have these regular ways and consistent ways to talk about essentially the same stuff every week, but to go deeper in what's working, what's not working, what do we have to move? How do you lend your insight to it? That's what makes your teams the most efficient. And when left to their own devices, some people, of course, on their own will be superstars and figure it all out. Most people, probably 8 out of 10, right, need guidance, need structure, need direction, right, to make sure that their work and their effort and their talents are being unlocked against the things that really make a difference. And that's how, by having these structures in place, they make a difference. I know, when my old company got to 500 employees, I knew that if somebody had decided, me or someone else, that we were going to change all the pens from black to blue, that would have taken us like a week to implement, because we would have just stuck it in the processes we already had, right? Management team would go out, they have their meetings with their teams, whatever, and now a week later everybody would have blue pens and they'd know why and whatever. Imagine if you're trying to roll that out for 500 employees, right? That's a lot what it feels when you don't have this type of structure in place, when you haven't set priorities and you don't have those processes and measures that ultimately make it work. Because remember, the reason I keep saying regular process, consistency, talking about the same things, is a lot of these things require talent and strategy to work, right? How do I get an investor to invest? Like, what's the strategy and what's the talent that's going to get that happen? How do I manage my website, right, process to make sure that's launched right away? How do I launch my product? And all of those things require attention and energy and strategic approaches and thought, right? If that's just done randomly, right, it's very difficult to be productive to moving to the things that are the most important. So those structures enable alignment of your teams and whatever resources you have, but they also allow you to impart your strategy and your thought and your talent and the talents of your team, right, towards that end. It's not just, oh, Michael, so all you have to do to raise money is have a meeting once a week. No, it's what you do in the meeting. And it's, oh, we had this idea about we're going to pitch this type of investor versus that type of investor, or we're going to go chase, this market is more right for us than that market. And that's what happens with consistency. One of the best analogies I ever heard was that, think about, it doesn't happen much now, hopefully it starts to happen more, as people when used to commute to work, right? If you went the same way every time, right, you kind of know what time the traffic is the worst, what impact the weather has, right? And you get efficient at it, right? Imagine if you commuted to work and every day you did it different, right? You'd almost feel like it takes so much more energy, because you're like, well, when should I go? How should I, like, that's what it feels like when it comes to time management when we don't put in place these process and structures. It feels like we're making it up new every time we sit down and talk about it, as opposed to, every week we're going to talk about money raising, and every week we're going to chip away and build upon it. And maybe we even have a project plan that says Joe does this and Sue does this and Jennifer does that, right? And it's that consistency of process, talking about the same things, allows you to be more, and these are the things you're striving for, more proactive, right? Not as reactive, more strategic, as opposed to doing things. Why are you doing things? Like, what makes you win, right? What makes an investor invest, as opposed to just, doing the things that need to be done. So the regular consistency of this stuff is what brings your time management into a way that is not only just from a time perspective, but from a success perspective. What gives you the best chance of success in the major priorities you're trying to achieve. Okay, so none of this is rocket science. This is, I think, tried and true things that if you can start to implement these things in the way that you manage your day, the way you manage your scarce resources, the way you think about priorities, you have to resist the temptation to say, I have to do 100 things, because that doesn't work even if you thought it would. I think that to the extent that you can add tools, right, around it, we're talking about keeping track through project management tools and task tools. I can't imagine using a notebook anymore. Like, I don't ever use one, because then I got to go into my notebook and then do something with it. It's just, I use tools that allow me to just go, have things in front of me that I can chip away at my computer. There are other things out there like automatic calendar invitations, right? There's tools out there that allow you to just send somebody a link to your calendar that can, book time in your calendar, that we at Lonely Entrepreneur all use. Because why? Because it's like, there's 7 emails back and forth about who's free on Tuesday, right? With people that are important for you to meet with. So I don't think that any one of these things in and of themselves, Victoria, you mentioned the business, or what's the magic pill? There isn't a magic pill. There's a whole bunch of, like most things in entrepreneurs, a series of things that if you put them in place, really allow you to be much more efficient and effective with your scarce time. Okay. Within the learning community, there is a whole bunch of this stuff, and I'll put it up on the screen, because a couple of people have told us that, even though we're providing this information here, it'd be great to also have places to reference. So I'm going to really quickly just pull up, everybody here has access to the learning community, right? So when you go into this learning community and you see it, and you go into these, what's called the learning areas, you have all of these areas and all of these learning modules that you have access to. And you have areas called managing yourself, right, and running your business, right, where within this you've got, tons and tons of things about, right, and here's a lot of the processes, right? What are the tools to stay organized? What are the basis processes to put in place, right, that that people, okay, regular meeting schedules, right, a whole bunch of different stuff. So please, everybody should be taking advantage of those tools if they're not already. Okay. Ms. Sherman, any other comments or thoughts before we wrap up, or does anybody else have any challenges or thoughts around time management you want to cover before we end?
I don't have any questions.
Cool.
Chris and Noah made some good comments. So attention, energy, strategies, and thought. Right on, Nolan.
Yeah, Chris, I see your comment. If for those of you who can't see it, a hard part is when members of our very lean staff get stuck in go through the motions mode and must be frequently reminded to achieve the key items which drive revenue and not just customer management tasks. that's where, Chris, thank you for that. That's where these regular processes matter, right? Because if you find that your team, two things is, number one, if you find your team getting distracted by the wrong things, those regular meetings where you can check in on that, right? When you're showing up every week and talking about the same stuff, you can say, guys, let's make sure we don't take our eye off the ball of X. The other thing is the learning that comes from that. So Chris, you made a comment that I think was very thoughtful, right? Like key items which drive revenue and not just customer management, right? So there's things that you do, right? But what goal is it aligned to, right? So you could say, let's say you have a customer meeting every week and you're doing stuff, you're communicating and you're teaching your teams, what's the difference between just doing things, just doing tasks, and actually hitting these customer goals. So I'll give you a quick specific example. If you oversee all your customers, and let's assume that you want every single one of those customers to stay with you from year 1 to year 2, that's your goal, customer retention, 100% customer retention. If you have a customer meeting every week and somebody says, well, we're doing this and we're doing this and we're doing this and we're doing this, and you said, okay, great. How likely are they to be retained? Well, I was really just thinking about the tasks. I wasn't thinking about specifically how to do that. Okay, are we doing the things that actually make them be retained? Right? If you think about when you've bought, like phone service and cable services, there's a reason why they're bundling all those services together, right? Is because it's really hard to leave, right? So Chris, to your point, how do you teach your people not just to do, but to think about the goal? That's not a natural for everybody. There's people that are in roles that are just like, we're supposed to do X and Y and Z. But through these regular processes, when you're coming and talking about it every week, right? You're saying, how do we proactively do things like bundle a product differently, right? At my old business, we gave away data integrations. We would give away something that competitors would charge for. So we'd go to health plan and say, how would you like to add other data into this healthcare rewards thing we're doing? And our team thought we were crazy because we're like, wait a minute, we can charge a lot of money for that. But the point was, the more integrated they were with us, the less likely they would be to leave. So when you have these regular meetings where you're talking about the same things every week with your team, you're teaching your team to think more and more about these goals, like revenue, like keeping customers, like those things, and less about just the tasks that they're doing. Even really young people in your company, even people that are right out of college, right? Like you want to teach them to think about these goals. It's hard because at first it's just like, we're going to do X, but you're doing X to try to accomplish a broader goal.
Michael, thank you for that. That's great. And I know we've got like 90 seconds left or something. So certainly this would be another topic for another day if one were wishing to touch the third rail. But when your business is one that also involves family on staff, that I hear everything you're saying about the goals and this and that. But if you have folks that aren't maybe necessarily wired that same way or whatever, then it's a little bit more challenging, shall we say, to try to inspire servant leadership and actions and things like that, and expect some of the members to take it up. The old and maybe this is just my Friday rant, but the old saying, familiarity can breed contempt. I think sometimes that is a layer that happens in many different businesses involving family. Maybe someday, Michael, I would love to, if that's a good subtopic for some Friday in the future, because I think there are a lot of small businesses, and sometimes there are extended family, direct family involvements, and sometimes we can't really push the levers as hard as if it was somebody that we could say, hi, been nice working with you, there's the door, have a nice day. You can't do that with family.
Yeah, or just hold them accountable in a way you would others. Yeah. So here's what I would say, Chris, and thank you for that. And it's a great topic to talk about. What I would say is this: when you set an objective set of criteria, like a goal that everybody is accountable to, that helps. It's not about your relationship with your brother or sister, your wife or your dog, right? It's about the goal. And if you're talking about that consistently, that helps. What also helps is regular process about that, right? Showing up every week and talking about the same thing. What really helps with family is putting a third party in the room, right? So when you have these regular meetings, let's say it's you and your fill in the blank family member, and you're trying to sell 10 bananas, right? And you all know you're supposed to sell 10 bananas. You show up in a weekly meeting and you sell 12 bananas, and you tell your, fill in the blank, hey, we're not getting there, right? That's hard because you have this different type of relationship. But if there's an advisor on that call every week who isn't your family member, and you're like, okay, let's talk about the 10 bananas, and you all talk about it, it changes the relationship between you and your family. And so these are just different things. Again, it relies on that process, Chris, and it relies on this objective goal that, hey, we're trying to launch the website in 60 days, nothing else matters. But with family members, sometimes it doesn't even matter, right? Because you have this different type of relationship. Stick somebody else in the room, it changes the dynamic a lot. Because if a family member says 2 + 2 is 5, and you're like, it isn't, then you're like, but if somebody else comes in and says, no, 2 + 2 is not 5, right? So definitely an interesting topic for another day, but something to think about. And thank you for that.
Thank you. Advisors do work. I can certainly endorse that. Yes.
Well, listen, thank you, everybody. Remember, everybody has access to the learning community and some of those tools, and we always appreciate everybody's time, especially in the middle of the summer on a Friday. So, Victoria, anything else we want to end with?
Nope, I think we are good. Thank you, everybody. Have a great
Thanks,
weekend.
everybody, for your time.